Welcome back, everyone. Lots of people are taking extra steps to keep cool during this heat wave. Now imagine what it takes for bears, penguins, and tigers. Gordon Severson went to the Minnesota Zoo to see how it's keeping animals safe during the hot weather.
This time of year, there are several ways to beat the heat. Here at the Minnesota Zoo, they have a splash pad for the kids. And for their animal residents,
who doesn't like snow in July?
They have special tricks to keep them cool.
This is our little male and female pine marten,
which is native to northern Minnesota, where they don't typically see temps in the 90s.
Some of the animals that struggle the most with the heat are not the ones you'd usually think about.
Zoologist Adam Kenniger says the penguins are inside where they can swim in freezing cold water. The buffalo have their ponds to swim in, and the bald eagles,
they do extremely well.
But the llamas need a little help. This one has claimed a special spot in front of a fan. Many also like to hang out by the sprinklers, and some animals like to just lay down in the shade.
Yeah, it's really easy to be lazy when it's hot like this.
Like us humans sitting in the air conditioning, the beavers rarely like to come outside in this heat. Same goes for the coyotes, who will either stay in their den all day or dig a hole and lay down in the shade.
Finding natural ways to cool themselves down.
But the two animals that really don't like the heat here at the zoo are the moose and the caribou. The caribou have special fans and misters, and they typically spend the entire day in the shade and tall grass. The moose were so deep into the shade, we couldn't even see them.
The moose are probably one of the animals that struggles the most with heat.
And as long as they keep all of this going, the water, the shade, the ice, and special treats, they're not worried about any health problems with any of these animals. They're working hard to make sure these animals are as comfortable as possible.
One of the things that we love to do is be creative to help these animals live their best life.
Gordon Severson, KARE 11 News.
Well, all this week we're celebrating America's 250th birthday with a special look at Minnesota's history. While the Revolutionary War was unfolding in the East, Minnesota wasn't even part of the United States yet. But this afternoon, Chris Hrapsky takes us back to 1776 to show us what our land looked like long before it was a state.
When you think of what defines Minnesota today, like the mall, the sports, the industry, none of that was here during the birth of the United States.
If you were to stand right here in what is now Minneapolis in 1776, you wouldn't see a skyline. You wouldn't see any city at all. No roads, no bridges, no power lines. This is what you would see. Oak and maple woodlands, tall prairie grass, the sounds of birds and buffalo, all mixed in with the great star of the show, the St. Anthony Falls.
The Falls of St. Anthony looked very different. They were a stone bench over which a huge cascade of water fell. There were islands at the base of it.
British explorer Jonathan Carver documented his travels through what is now Wisconsin and Minnesota in the 1760s. His book became a bestseller. This is how he described the falls.
We could distinctly hear the noise of the water a full 15 miles before we reached the falls. When I approached this astonishing work of nature, a more pleasing and picturesque view cannot, I believe, be found throughout the universe.
At that time, Dakota people inhabited the southern half of the region, the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe, the northern half. The closest European settlements at the time were Prairie du Chien, Mackinac, and Montreal.
The area that we call Minnesota today was often referred to by the Dakota as Minnesota Makoche, by the Ojibwe as Gamanazadi Kag. The land honestly looked very different than it does today. You know, in the 1700s, snowshoes were a requirement to get around across the state, not a recreational luxury like they are today.
Minnesota in the 1770s was a really happening place. This was land that was claimed by the British Empire, but it was really controlled by Dakota people and Ojibwe people who had been for more than a century trading furs with first the French and then the English.
There were established trading posts in places like Grand Portage and Fond du Lac near present-day Duluth. European traders would also travel to native villages to swap manufactured kettles, tools, and guns for native furs. And these interconnected waters were the MSPs, I-94s, and strip malls of the time.
This is another major place of spiritual and historical significance in Minnesota. This way is the Minnesota River, and over here is the Mississippi River. This is the exact point where they converge. It's known as Pike Island today, but to the Dakota it is called Bedote, and it is the epicenter of the Dakota origin story.
There's a particular creation story that's tied to Bedote, which talks about us coming from and being from the center of the universe. And that's where Bedote is from, and that's where our creation story, where we came down from the stars. It still holds that significance to Dakota people.
What you want to achieve is a kind of a perfectly level surface.
And if you want to see what Dakota villages looked like, this is the place.
So far as we really know, there are no other sites like this because, in fact, it's never been cultivated, it's never been disturbed.
Near Red Wing, anthropology professor Ron Shermer is leading a team of researchers to excavate this 1,000-year-old Dakota village, known as the Bell Creek site.
This river that runs right past here, the Canyon River, that's where it gets its name. Rivière de Canots, river of canoes. That's what they would have seen that 250 years ago. Canoes everywhere. At that time, there would have been more people here than kind of in the area that we now think of as downtown Minneapolis.
The land purchased by the Prairie Island Indian community in 2019 contains tools and 68 known burial mounds.
When you bury your ancestors somewhere, that is your connection to them.
The average Minnesotan doesn't have to think about this, but Dakota people residing here in Minnesota do.
To the east, a new nation is being born. But the story in Minnesota, 1776, is a native one.
So fascinating. That story, it got a lot more complicated as European empires laid claim to the land from thousands of miles away. So exactly who claimed it and how did it eventually become part of the United States? Those answers in a story coming up tonight at 10. Stick with us. We got more weather and news coming up.